Доброго дня усім присутнім.
Good afternoon, everyone. We continue our project Red Lines for the new parliament, and I would like to start the third block of discussions concerning humanitarian issues. I'm Leonid Maruschak, and I'm the head of culture department of UCMC, and I'm happy to moderate this discussion. The department I work in UCMC, we deliver a lot of time to issues we are going to discuss today with the representatives of political forces that will 100% be in the new parliament. I would like to announce our guests who are here today with us. These are representatives of political forces and parties. I would start. Rostislav Pavlenko, European Solidarity Party representative. Markian Lubkivsky, Fatherland Party. Alexandra Dvoretska, Golos or Voice Party. You see that one chair is empty. This is for Nikita Paturaev, who would represent Servant of People Party. Unfortunately, he is not here today with us. Maybe he will be later, and we will be glad to welcome him if he comes. Before discussing the issues you see on the screen, I would like to introduce our experts who are in the hall. And I would like to remind to you that we have such an agenda: 3 questions, 3 minutes for each question for the speakers, and when the questions you see on the screen end, then we will give the floor to our experts in the audience. If we have time, we will give the floor to everyone who wants to speak. I would like to introduce our experts. Maxim Dvorovy, lawyer of Digital Security Laboratory. Irina Chulivska, head of the Laboratory of Digital Security. Nia Maxim Alinek, executive director of the Center of Research of the movement. He is a philosopher. He is in the middle, Mr. Evgen Stepanenko, the film director. They are in the front rows. Now, let's start. Marianne will leave 5 minutes to 3. That's why we will set this timeline. We start with the de-communisation issue. Does your political force plan to stop or to revise the policy of de-communization in Ukraine? Who is going to start? Please, the floor is given to Rostislav Pavlenko, and he represents European Solidarity Party. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm glad to see dear colleagues, experts here. We will have a brief speech. So decommunization is important because this is the part of decolonization policy, and Ukraine should find its place in the world and to interpret historical events and their reflections into the future that represent Ukrainian interests and Ukrainian vision. And here we should protect these things because some people want to play on these contradictions, and then to continue the policy in the context of the development of national memory, national patriotic upbringing, and to find common grounds for everyone in society based on cultural codes. Servant of the People Party representative joined us now, Nikita Paturaev, and Batkivshina or Fatherland Party is a patriotic pro-Ukrainian party. It supports processes of decommunization. That's why there will be no revision of the concept. We fully support all those initiatives that were implemented, and we should go along this way, because this way is the way for the Ukrainian identity that separates us from the Soviet past, and this allows us to be Ukrainians and call ourselves Ukrainians. And in our political force, we have such people, including me. We were involved in the processes of decommunization. I mean, Valentina Levaychenko, he had the security service twice. He was one of the initiators, and he implemented the processes concerning decommunization. They disclosed KGB and SBU archives, and this allowed Ukrainians to return their national memory, bring back their national memory. Also, Nulsky prison case that was disclosed. These are our Ukrainian things. And also important issue is the issue of Golodomor and terrible losses of Ukraine because of this terrible crime against Ukrainians committed by communism regime. That's why we fully support those initiatives that were implemented, and we will develop them together with pro-Ukrainian forces that will be in the next parliament. Thank you. Now we give the floor to Alexandra Dvaretska, Voice Party. Voice political party also supports processes of decommunization, but I would like to state that often Ukrainian voters, Ukrainian citizens see the communization process as renaming of the streets or localities or removal of monuments. But in reality, this is a broader process, and I would like to continue with the issue of archive data and independence of the National Memory Institute, because as of today, we see that in SBU building, there is an archive, and we do not know whether the policy be changed concerning access to the data and how they digitalize the data and how they provide access to this archive to citizens. I think that people try to get access, but you should get permit. You should go first to one address, then to Zatelova-Teveritska Street, and in some moment in time this access may be prevented. We should establish justice, and Ukrainian citizens should know about the tragedies that happened in this territory. We should know who are guilty persons. And I will take some time and give some example. I was in Bratislava, and there was a meeting at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Slovakia, and I saw a person with aggressive attitude towards us. It was pro-Russian position, and due to open archive in Czech Republic concerning overcoming of social past and provision of justice. This person continues the work in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but he was informant, and this person was revealed from and had to leave Sweden before. So this is not something in the past, not something in the manuals. We should do it now, and we should protect this. So Voice Party supports decommunization. But the question was, are you going to stop it or revise it? What will be next? To stop or to revise? I believe this is limitation. I, once again, would like to say that we would like to support the Institute of National Memory. They should be independent, and there should be continuation of this process. I'm from Crimea and I work with the East. We have many challenges in decommunization in returning of the occupied territories. I would like to remind the question to our colleague. So, does your political force want to stop or revise existing policy of decommunization in Ukraine? The answer is provided by the servant of the People Party. So now we're trying to convince each other in what we all believe. I would like to say that, of course, there should not be any revision or stopping. This process should continue, and I am grateful to my colleague from Voice Party. And she said about disclosure of information, and the archives of SBU should stay open, and starting President Yushchenko and during Poroshenko's time this work was done, and it is really important work to open these archives, and this should be continued. And I would like to say that opening of the archives, this is a powerful information tool that we use efficiently. We should continue to work it efficiently because we are example for many countries of former Soviet Union, for the country that closes access to archives, and we should open our archives and we should digitalize them. This is important for our domestic scientists and for foreign scientists. And I believe, as I understand this topic, we are the only window and the only source where Western scientists may get information about crimes of USSR and Stalin and NKVD and KGB crimes. That's why we should continue with this work. Also, I would like to stress that this is my personal opinion, and I believe that we should disclose archives concerning secret cooperation of the citizens of Ukraine with KGB. It was done in Baltic states, and this is a painful topic. This topic is difficult, but I believe that we should do it, because without it, we cannot say goodbye to the totalitarian past. I believe that I would defend this topic in our discussions, and I believe that this should be done. About bright examples my colleagues mentioned, trying to return old names. I'm convinced I'm sure that we should not only rename, not only in school. Someone may miss the classes of history, but we have mass media, and mass media should pay attention to this issue. And electronic and TV broadcasters, and also on the internet, stories should be told to remind people about this. When people support return of the name of Zhukov to the avenue, I would smile also ironically, but I know what Zhukov did during war. He is the winner, but the price was too high. We should tell these stories constantly. If we said this once, it is not enough. These should be narratives. We should not forget the past. USSR should not be transformed into some sweet memories that everything was okay. It was not okay. Thank you, Mikita. Rostislav, I am Markian. I agree with the opinion of my colleagues. I would like to say that the issues connected with our history, with the opening of the archives, this should be part of curricula at school. This is important for upbringing of Ukrainian children. Concerning information about this ideological issue, it is really important for younger generations. And not all archives were open. We said about SBU archive when Mr. Nalivaychenko was the head of the service, and there are archives of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the Prosecutor's General Office archives, and we believe that those archives should be open as well.
Одному, що
I would like to emphasize that we invited you as representatives of the parties. That's why we would like to know the attitude and position of your political parties. If you've been representing your personal point of view, then please underscore this. Normal decommunization process is not possible without independent courts and unprejudiced judiciary. I believe that judiciary, under-fulfilled judiciary reform will allow to doubt in some processes in the future. For the Voice political party, judiciary reform is an important issue. If via murky judicial reform you may repeal any decision about renaming the street, etc., that's useless for further development. I would like to add a couple of words. We have started important discussion. We should look at our legislation with fresh eyes. How we plan to follow decentralization process. We have to say very clearly and distinguish between the competences of the central power and local authorities, and to set clear boundaries for the competences in decommunization as to central authorities and local authorities. Of course, local communities should have big rights as to the renaming of the streets, but still we have the state law on decommunization. The community should have their voice. As far as I understand, all four political forces support this process and are ready to extend it in political sphere, in terms of archives, so that the decommunization will continue and we have chances to do those things which remained unimplemented during previous 4 years. Now about the language policy. What is your attitude to the Ukrainian language law and to the language quotas in general? Let's give the floor to Mikita Potoraya from the People's Servant Party. Some 20 years ago, in the National Council of Broadcasting, I was a supporter of Ukrainian language against the domination of Russian language. I had been reading the draft law on the state language long before it was passed. And our party position is that we have a supremacy of the European law over our national law. We should draft our legislation, but not violate European charters. We cannot draft and state that we are harmonizing with the European law and with the other hand, change Ukrainian constitution. I have doubts that Ukrainian law on the languages complies with European charters. So in our party we have started professional discussion about this law. We have been analyzing it against the provisions of European charters. We do not oppose this law, but we do not understand why full functioning of Ukrainian language we have to establish new central executive agency. Our fundamental position is that the number of state agencies should be cut down and in order to prevent further expenses of the budget. We believe that the governmental agencies should not be numerous but strong. And we do not think that establishment of the bureaucratic body will resolve the problem. Testing function, according to the law, is put on the special testing body, but I do not understand why standardization function is not put on the Ministry of Culture. Why do we need a special ministry? We will answer one by one and then come back to the questions. Thank you. The discussion is becoming hotter. As a political force, we believe that protection of the Ukrainian language functioning is important as much as de-communisation. We have started doing this, and when the law was drafted, we had a lot of discussions inside the country and abroad, and we managed to smooth up a lot of aspects which might raise the biggest protests. And by the way, the transition provisions allow postponement of many language provisions. And it is similar to the moratorium of the land circulation. As for the European charters, if you mean protection of the regional languages and minorities, actually, this is the different. There is different intention. This stresses protection of the disappearing languages of minorities, while in Ukraine, Ukrainian language, because of many post-communist and historical reasons, requires special protection. As for the ministry, not ministry, but the central executive agency would accumulate the functions which are now dissolved in other ministries, and that will allow to focus governmental attention on the Ukrainian language development. As a party, we will contribute all possible efforts to implement this law. When it comes to the protection of minorities as such, we have different regulations. Once again, first of all, position of your party. Later on, we will discuss your personal position. As to the Batkivshchina party's position in the language law, all the Batkivshchina MPs in parliament voted for this law, and we support this policy aimed at protection of the Ukrainian language. We stand in a position that for many centuries Ukrainian language was oppressed and persecuted. That's why we have to restore its status quo. Of course, our policy is not limited towards this law exclusively. We have a package of laws in the cultural and national area. In your parliament, we will support all positive trends in funding of Ukrainian culture, which was started in the past. So we believe it's important to finance culture. We think that it should be 8 or even 9 billion of revenue allocated for funding of culture, while now we allocate only 6 billion of revenue. The next, we support allocation of sufficient amount of money for development of Ukrainian cinema and reading. We also will support reading of Ukrainian books in Ukrainian language on TV and radio, and thus spread and disseminate development of this language. An important aspect is that we support operations of Ukrainian Institute of Books, which is chaired by Alexandra Koval, which role is important in implementation of the culture policy. From our point of view, Ukrainian culture should play educational role inside the country and as a propagandistic instrument abroad. That's why we are very much concerned with the delayed activities of the Ukrainian Institute abroad. We should be able to present our national humanitarian interests abroad. I would like to say to Mikita that we should not run ahead of a train. As of now, we have recommendation of the Venice Commission. We have to fulfill recommendations of our partners, but we have to set the order and revive the status of Ukrainian language at home. All our neighboring countries used to do like that, working as a diplomat in the Balkan countries. For example, Croatia, Poland, Hungary, they all have similar, and Hungary itself, they have similar laws because they take care about languages. The Golos party supports the language law. For me, it's not the party issue but I come from Crimea, and in March 2014 I was in Crimea, and I know how it is easy to manipulate with the language issues when you live in such a Russian language region as Crimea used to be. So supporting the law on languages and supporting Article 10 of the Constitution, which provides for the state language as Ukrainian language in Ukraine. This should be properly reflected. This provision of the Constitution should be properly reflected in the law. For many years, language experts, politicians, and experts, they worked on drafting that law. And it is important to popularize and to interpret the norms of the law. Today, quite often propaganda forgets to mention that the language law does not cover any religious ideas and private communication, and obligatory mastering of Ukrainian language by civil servants. It's a natural requirement. If you do not want to communicate in Ukrainian, you may not apply to the civil service. You may go to business, stay in private environment. I work with people from Crimea. I work with people from the East. Quite often people do not understand how this law should be implemented. By the way, Russian Federation actively invests into distortion of these law provisions, and our objective is to introduce tools for the language law implementation. As far as I know, Ukrainian Cultural Fund has launched several initiatives. We have to develop the language development initiatives like Anastasia Rozlutska, which for the 6 years had established special Ukrainian language courses for people. We had to explain people that not mastering Ukrainian language does not deprive them from the opportunities in life. The Voice Party and our leader contributed much to popularization of Ukrainian language and Ukrainian culture all around Ukraine in all the territories. Let us sum up the second question. So, the three parties unilaterally support the language law, while the servant of people let me clarify it. You have discussions inside the party about creation of the new agency. We support that the law should exist, the law on languages. We do not like everything in this law from the point of view that not all of them will reach the purpose. So our position is that that Ukrainian language is unilateral state language in Ukraine. We believe that all the central broadcasting agencies should be Ukrainian language, those which use national resources, but we do not understand, and I do not understand as a person, as a media person, I do not understand why the state goes into private business, while publishers, or if they want to print a book in any language, why they cannot do this, why the state tries to interfere into magazines business, etc. That's why I personally I will emphasize that we have to review those provisions where the state interferes into private business. We should, in the spheres where we should look at the content, whether it is Ukrainian content. I worked in the media where people earn money because in real life it works based on the profit-based. Minimal, you may impose minimal tax on Ukrainian language book, but if it is the foreign language book, you may impose additional tax on it. But I trust in education, in popularization and economic stimuli. But you should not allow Timofey Milovanov to say that they will not stick with the law because they have English lectures. Of course, we should apply the language and implement the law, but we should not interfere into the market mechanisms. For young people, there is no the question about Ukraine. We are running out of time. It's not a format of discussion. It's not a format of your personal statements. You were invited here to present position of your parties. In the future, we may organize topical discussions. The question, thank you for your answers. For us, it was important to understand your positions. And now the third question about information security. Today's morning, when we had been discussing the security issues, it was mentioned that everything except security could be put aside, but if you ignore many aspects in this humanitarian bloc, then security issue might become even more problematic. So the question to you, do you support potential and existing prohibition of information and entertainment resources that contain Russian propaganda.
Thank you for your question. I remind one example. When I worked in Balkans, there were painful injuries of 1991-1996 and events in Yugoslavia. And I asked my Croatian friend how he sees the situation with the presence of Serbian film or Serbian music or mass media in Croatia. And he said that we set clear threshold. From one side we had enemies, from the other side we had our allies, so we want to have clear position in our legislation concerning the most important cause of today's Ukraine. This is counteraction to Russian aggression, and we believe that in this issue we should be tough. We believe that it's not time to speak with them, and when this time comes, this will be when the Russian Federation would give us back Crimea and when they leave occupied territories, and this is our principal position. Moreover, we believe that information security issues should be in the framework of all the issues of national security. This issue should be really important in the activity of the ministry that was created, and the work of the ministry cannot be directed against political opponents. It should be directed against the aggressor in order to counteract. This is a very important issue. When we are speaking about the activity of SBU, and we've discussed this issue during previous panel, we believe that this service should be deprived of inappropriate functions concerning economy, except two important elements. These are counterintelligence and anti-terror, and we should reinforce this service concerning cybersecurity. This is the important national security issue, and we lack legislation on this, and we have now big discussions in society whether it is appropriate, and if we're speaking about the enemy, of course, we should not allow them to do this. So now we give the floor to Alexandra. Please, you're given the floor. Thank you. I believe that the topic of information security issue is broader, and I would like to join two discussions, whether the market can regulate this. Market may regulate this if conditions are equal. When market is saturated, you may compete on equal grounds. And this is also true in the sphere of information security. But please give us the answer. So I'm answering. Yes, we support. We believe that Ukraine should reinforce information security, especially in the conditions of hybrid war and military actions, trenches. These are decorations to everything else that is going on, because the majority of military actions are in the heads of Ukrainians and those Europeans who are convinced that Russia is not so dangerous and they are normal partners, reliable partners with whom they can work. And our accountant and the organization, when they use 1C, an alternative should be provided in order to transfer. And in 2014, a part of civil servants used mail rule, and they didn't doubt it. And this is the issue of training. The last year, we saw at checkpoints, we saw that future students. They wanted to pass independent testing. They registered for external testing. So these are Ukrainian children who decided to study in controlled territory, and we have this information now about them. When we are speaking about information security, it is not just to remove Одноклассники ВКонтакте, and this is one of the directions, and we may say that here in this market in Ukraine we have big players. We use YouTube, Facebook, and others, and the same about the media. Information security. Yesterday there was a picket near News One channel concerning we need to talk program. Everyone understood the response of society. 13,000 people were killed, and it's not enough to speak to resolve the problem if the territory is not returned and military actions continue. Information security issue should also be carried out at a grassroots level, and it should be also done in the state sector. This should be not only idea, but there should be training for civil servants and for local self-government. And everything starts from school, actually. Thank you for the analogy that the front line is a visible part, and also there is an invisible part of war that is in the sphere of information security sector. So if you have some questions to me, unfortunately I should leave now. Please, if you have questions. So first, the questions from experts. Do you have questions? Irina Chulivska. Thank you. I have a question. Are you going to initiate or support legislative initiatives on regulations concerning internet? If so, what is your position? Because I didn't hear about clear position. Because today there is a legal mechanism for blocking these resources, extrajudicial process. I cannot tell you from all the parties, but this should be discussed in the framework of formation of coalition in the next parliament, and it is evident that the position concerning internet, it should get attention and to be put in the next coalition agreement. This is a difficult issue, and of course we believe that there should be freedom, but there is legislation and red lines. There are some things that pose the threat to national security, and the law enforcement body should respond properly, but we support freedom of speech, and people should express freely on the internet. It should be not roughly regulated, but this is the issue for special services who deal with the national security issues. Thank you. Thank you for your question. Markian Yurkivsky, who represents Batьківщина party. He has to leave. And now we are speaking about international security issue, and the floor is given to Rostislav. Yes, we support limitations you've mentioned, but here we should provide proper explanations why. First, the war is hybrid. It includes information and humanitarian issues. These are the front lines of this war, and Putin and his colleagues were taught to use the weaknesses of the Western lifestyle weaknesses. We should have a field for dialogue to find a way of protection, and it should not create obstacles to freedom of speech, and this should pose clear mechanisms of protection against Russian propaganda and Russian aggression and spread of hate speech and other things that Russia used to provide the narratives into Ukrainian society, and we cannot rely on the market on this. And I agree with Alexandra completely. We are not in equal conditions. There is aggressor who invests huge centralized resources. They are managed in a good way. They support the information printed and pixel products. That's why, unfortunately, the market cannot correct the situation. And we have previous history when Russian product had preferences, both natural and not natural. And we should have some limitations. And also we should support Ukrainian products. We should not oppose the products, but we should support the products, and there should be coalition agreement, and legislation should be developed, and we should not threaten the freedom in society. And the decision of the European Court concerning speech of hatred, and France also adopted legislation concerning fake news, and in Germany they have discussions, and in the US they also have discussions on this, and also cooperation with the civil society and colleagues with partner countries, and we hope we will find answer to this question. So, do you support, as a political force, existing and potential prohibition of information and entertainment resources that contain Russian propaganda? I would like to add, and I respond with this addition, legal entities, no matter what they are, because we see expansion to our market. It is allegedly done with the use of hryvnias. It looks that like they are our economic entities, but not only Russian. They may be any from different nations. For example, some offshores in the Pacific Ocean, for example. No matter what, for us, the essence is important. What they provide as their content. I am convinced in this, and I believe that my colleagues will agree that when we speak about war, we are moving in the Russian narrative, hybrid war. What does it mean? What is it, hybrid war? It has clear name. It is non-conventional war. They should go to the Hague Tribunal for this. This is non-conventional war. The last one was Germany, and they had conventional war. I mean Nazis, Nazi Germany. And there were USA allies and France as allies, and now they have this non-conventional war carried out by Russia against us, and these are the non-conventional war means that are used against us. So we should create our own narrative. We should build it. This is not the task for today. We should have our own narrative about this war that is a crime against us committed by Russia. And I believe that we will do it together as political parties. About the internet, of course, we have many people in digital area in our party, and we are against prohibitions. We do not have something like Roskomnadzor like they do in Russia, the organization that supervises the media. And I support my colleagues. We understand that we do not have such big money to be equal with Russians in this area. So there is experience of France. There are interesting examples in Great Britain and the USA, and we study this experience in our party. The Baltic Estonian experience is really interesting, and we as a party support the idea that in this war, in this information front, for us this is war. In this information part of frontline, we should use obligatory state and private and civil and public partnership. This should be a state, private and civil partnership. Otherwise, we won't be efficient. We should get united. We should unite the resources of the state, of private sector, and of civil society.
And we will start our Q&A session. I have 20 seconds. We have heard about absolute prohibition. No, we believe that prohibitions should be well balanced against violation of human rights. And European Court on Human Rights, it uses this methods balancing the threats and violation of human rights. At the same time, we are now at the front line of ideological fight. We are now developing new rights, actually, and much will depend on us. Now we move to the audience. Максим Дворовий. Alexandra mentioned about the need of the rules. Mikita emphasized the content and looking at the surrounding environment. The question to you, the role of the National Council of Television and Broadcasting. Actually, the membership of this National Council started to respond on the content, but nevertheless, they are unable to respond to the hybrid aggression. Whether we should rely on the National Council is the question to everybody. Position of your party, please. Alexandra, you may start. Yesterday's situation has emphasized that the National Council has to implement national legislation. The yesterday's events go beyond the scope of the legislation, and the National Council has powers in terms of licensing, etc. And so extension of the powers will bring in the question about the council's independence, how members are selected, how they are supervised, etc. One of our priorities as a party is to de-oligarchalize media, make it more dependent, make media more dependent from the oligarchs. Part of this strategy should be strengthened the key role of the National Council, which has to control how the money come to the media sector and how who pays this money. Of course, the National Council has to fulfill its powers. Whether it should be strengthened, it's a question. You mentioned private-public partnership and contact with the public is very important for the National Council. That's why all sorts of contact with public, including involvement of public. And in this context, we should emphasize on the protection of journalists' rights, including protection from the editorial pressure, oligarchs' pressure, and strengthening of journalist standards, which should go in the strategy of de-oligarchization of the TV channels. As a former member of the National Broadcasting Council, as of today, it has not enough powers as a regulator. It has to be reformed. They have 8 members. This is incorrect situation. We do not see any sense in existence of the National Council and State Committee on TV and radio. It should become a regulator. I will not repeat about the powers. But I believe that we should strengthen the independence of the National Broadcasting Council. We should ensure involvement of broad public. That is, giving more powers, we should prevent this regulator from turning into a monster. I'm Anna Olinek. I have many questions, but please be brief. Mikita mentioned about the secrecy of archives. There is one collision in the legislation that some cases, around 2,000 cases, were made classified, and now the archive services is removing this classified heading. I am happy to hear your position that you value functioning of the law enforcement agencies and judiciary as the main grounds for proper functioning of the humanitarian area, and that Mr. Kernes will be a responsibility for violation of the de-communisation law. And third question, whether the political force, people's servant, understands that the law on Ukrainian language is designed to guarantee designed for the sake of Ukrainian people, Ukrainian younger people who cannot get Ukrainian education in Ukrainian language. Please limit yourself to 3 questions. And the third question, Just yes or no. Now, in Europe, there is an international campaign about international tribune about condemnation of the Russian totalitarian leaders. Tribunal about crimes of the Soviet regime is very important thing. Crimes of Nazis and the Soviet leaders are not different in nature. We should go back to the Lenin's and Trotsky's novelties and look at the victims of their crimes. As for the archives, I understood your position. I will try to clarify the situation, and as for the law on the languages, as a member of educational community, I understand the problem with education in Ukrainian language, but it should not be just the law on language which has to resolve it. I believe that all the educational, higher education in Ukraine should be done in English language. As for the issue about education, we have this problem. It's not a recent problem. It had been oppressed for a long period of time, but the language law is important here. I thought your first question was about condemnation of queerness. We do not hear him. We mentioned judiciary reform, that we will support it, and correction of the mistakes. Some notorious courts are not being liquidated. As for the tribunal, we support such a tribunal. If you do not understand the tragedy of Ukrainian people in the interwar period, as to the famine, as to the political repressions, as to the delimitation of textbook which should be read by people to understand what had happening. And as for educational process, I had a chance to see the educational process in Luhansk region where we simply do not have teachers, and we do not have Ukrainian language teachers, we do not have teachers at all. Whether we can motivate teachers to go to this profession, and the language competencies should be raised, and how we will motivate people to work in the pre-front regions. But where can you find money for through his bank, etc.? I fully support what you say about But when it comes to such cities as Dnipro, for example, but not that quickly, but gradually, it is going on. Of course, we should create additional incentives in the law, but this is step-by-step process. We should move forward and not turn back. But we do not expect that in Dnipro city the rocket and missiles faculty will turn into Ukrainian language when they have no textbooks. That's Vahtang. 3 questions. One is to de-communisation. It is important to understand not what we do, but how we do. And I have heard today the rhetoric, the several messages which had frightened me without further military leader Zhukov is not a military leader for me. He is a military leader for Russia, but for me he is a military criminal. And now the question about decommunization of higher education. What's your attitude as to decommunization of higher education? We should continue decommunization from the streets and towns to decommunization of secondary and higher education in the content to prevent statements that Zhukov is general commander and he is a great military leader, while he is not. So the question to you, decommunization in higher education. As for the language policy, I think that you should shift the emphasis. We do not cut down the quotas on Russian context. The state has to protect languages. We should not take care about Russian language. We have to take care about Ukrainian language. What's your attitude as to the preservation of quotas for Ukrainian language? We all believe it should be. Mr. Lubkivsky mentioned the Ukrainian Institute and the Ukrainian in the Institute of Ukrainian Book, whether this will be supported or not. Yeah, sure. So you will not cut down and a small comment about English language. I support the knowledge of languages, but we should not transfer to English language into education. As for the publications in there are no limitations in Russian book publishing. I disagree with you. And now about security. News one. Do you think that those mass media which openly lead pro-Russian propaganda, how do you support that we should deprive them from license? The communization of higher education. I would stand for. I graduated from Tavria University, who was a party functionary who came from Moscow, and I know how this influences the university. We do not have the party position about decommunization of universities. We should have decommunization in civil service, in the universe, in News One violated Ukrainian legislation, and the National Council has to make decision about this violation. As for News One, of course it should happen, and the National Council has to make its decision about decommunization of higher education in the context of national memory and reform of education. There are specific decrees, and I believe that they will be implemented. Parliamentary decree about there are some steps that have to be implemented. Decommunization of education, complicated question, but I have to answer very shortly. Decommunization of the educational curricula. An example with Zhukov is that we have to do two steps, that he is not a great military leader, but he is now, that should be done in two steps. As for the rest that you mentioned, I probably could agree with you, but we have to discuss it. About News One, dear colleagues, it's not that simple. Had won all the courts with the state and the National Council. If we want to win, we have to be. Now we are preparing the National Security and Defense Council meeting about News One, and there might be decisions not about licenses, but in the next parliament, in first turn, we should introduce strong and active instruments to stop informational expansion. And the very last question from Ukrainian Crisis Media Center. I have a question from the area of politics. What your political force can do to protect the parliament from the impact of lobbyists? I can provide just personal answer. Ukraine should pass the law on the lobbies, the law on the lobby. I support my colleagues. Thank you very much. I would like to thank to all our speakers, to all our experts. Unfortunately, we do not have enough time to discuss the questions of culture. And I would like to finish with the Winston Churchill phrase, if we are not fighting for the culture, then what we are fighting for. With this, I would like to finish and mention that the cultural issues are important. Thank you for your attention. Nearest future, we will discuss these issues in new parliament.
Шановні колеги, нагадую, що у нас внизу кава. Всі питання можете обговорити,